Hello everyone, and welcome to another News Coolum video and another plug side chat. So I wanted to talk a bit about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I'm seeing a lot of car reviewers now finally sort of warming up to the Chevrolet Bolt EV. And when I say car reviewers, I actually mean the EV influencers, people within the EV media, because traditional auto journalists have loved the Bolt EV from the very beginning, because it's sort of this no-nonsense, no-frills, low-cost, long-range electric vehicle that really opens the door for a lot of people to get into an electric car. It's very simple, it's easy to own, easy to drive. And so now we're finally seeing that from other EV journalists who, for a while, really hated on the Bolt EV because it kind of flew in the face of everything that they were told that they should value from an electric vehicle. And this kind of gets to the greater point of what I'm talking about, where I feel like there's an element of Tesla groupthink that's going on within the EV community. And it's very specific to charging. And the Chevrolet Bolt EV has sort of become the poster child of this because, again, it pushes back on this notion that super fast DC charging rates are the way that electric vehicles are going to go mainstream. On all other fronts, the Bolt EV is highly competitive and can literally replace a gas car in a single car family for most Americans, thanks to its 200 plus, really close to 300 mile real world range. Just like I said, all of the functions and features that you would expect in a middle priced car for around $30,000. So it's already price parity with gas cars, all of that. Performance even is superior to most gas cars that you can get for the same price. So it's that sticking point about charging speeds. And, we're seeing this sort of escalation, if you will, to the point where now I'm hearing a lot of these journalists saying that, it's a great car, but we need to increase the charging speeds. And I have to ask, do we really? Because yes, we've seen like Kia and Hyundai in particular with their eGIMP platform, they've dived hard, right into that game that Tesla was playing about super fast charging speeds being the only way to really legitimize an electric vehicle, to the point now where those eGIMP cars are, in my opinion, they are the crown holders, if you will. They are the top of the pack in terms of charging speeds. When you can charge to 80% in under 20 minutes on most chargers that are available, you're getting close to parity with gas cars in terms of recharging time. The question, though, again, is that really necessary? Because you're getting into that mode where you think that that's absolutely necessary, and people aren't stopping to think that, okay, just because we can make an electric vehicle charge that fast, do we have to? Because this expectation that those super fast charging speeds are required, it flies in the face of all of the data that we have up to this point. I'm talking about data from BTS, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, data from DOT, the Department of Transportation, data from NREL, the National Renewable Energy League, all of which say very similar things, that a majority of drivers will never take a single 200 to 300 mile round trip per year. A majority of drivers only drive 50 miles or less per day, and 90% of all charging is done at work or home on slow level 2 AC charging, to the point that DC charging just really isn't that big of an issue. So for a majority of drivers, and I'm being kind when I say that, it's really closer to 70 to 75% of all drivers, DC fast charging speeds are mostly irrelevant. And so you have to consider that what is it that 3C charging speed is costing you. And so I really maybe should define what I mean by this too, because I'm going to use sort of general terms, because if I say 1C, 2C, 3C, that's very technical. And essentially it means that you're going to be able to charge as fast in kilowatts as your battery has kilowatt hours. So a Bolt EV with a 65 kilowatt hour pack, 1C would be 65 kilowatt. And if you have just for simplicity, 100 kilowatt hour pack that can charge at 2C, that would be 200 kilowatt. So very similar to what we see in the Cadillac Lyriq, where it's a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack with 190 kilowatt peak charging speeds. And then if it's a 3C at 100 kilowatt hour battery pack, you would be charging at 300 kilowatt. So that would be closer to something like a Lucid Air. Now, and those are sort of generalizations, but you could also think of it in terms of, if you want to look at the sort of meat of the charging curve from 0 to 80%, a 1C car is a car that I would expect to do 0 to 80% in around an hour. A 2C would be 0 to 80% in somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes. And a 3C car should really be able to do 0 to 80% in about 20 minutes or less. So you see there's a sort of escalation with how quickly these cars charge in time frame as well. And so that's really the class of cars that I'm describing. But when you get to something like a 3C charging rate, there is a very real cost to that a lot of people don't want to talk about. So the battery cost itself is higher, and the energy density is lower, right? And so you end up with less active battery material per given mass in the battery. And so as a result, you end up spending more money in material costs, but also in terms of packaging costs, in terms of cooling, thermal management. All of these other aspects increase the cost and the weight and the complexity of a car in order to achieve that 3C charging rate. And so if you go back to that data that I referred to before, things like the BTS data, the DOT data, if there's not a huge amount of value to that, and what people are really looking for is sort of a base range to cover all of their driving needs, lower cost, well, a 1C battery, or all things being equal, a 1C EV will be lower cost, longer range, lighter and more efficient than a 3C battery EV. So those are huge benefits, right? And so if a majority of drivers doesn't see a benefit from a higher speed, faster charging EV, well then, are they absolutely necessary? I think that there is still a place for 1C charging rate cars. And so in my opinion, I actually think that in order for an automaker to be maybe not just healthy, but to have a broad spectrum of offerings that really speak to a number of different consumers, I think at this point in time, an automaker should be striving to have an offering in each class. And so right now what we're seeing is sort of a mixture, but not exactly, because someone like a Hyundai or a Kia, they're offering 3C EVs, and they're offering 1C EVs, but nothing in between. Whereas GM right now currently offering 1C EVs and 2C EVs, but they're not really offering any of those 3C EVs. So we're not seeing that full-on balance yet, but there are benefits to each category. And so if you're someone who, wants a bit more power, a bit more range, but also, wants to see that balance, those 2C Ultium batteries that are being released by GM make a lot of sense. Whereas if you are someone who's a high value shopper, a 1C EV, something like the Bolt EV, would make a lot more sense. And one of the things that I think people were saying about Hyundai and Kia is, why would anyone buy a Kona Electric right now or a Kia Niro EV right now when you could get a Kia EV6 or a Hyundai Ioniq 5 instead? And that question is very legitimate. And what it really means to me is that at this point, the Kia Niro EV and the Hyundai Kona EV are probably just overpriced, right? They would need to drop their price by about $5,000 to $10,000 in order to really fit into the different niches that Hyundai and Kia are operating in. Whereas something like GM's model actually makes a lot of sense in that if the Bolt EV is starting in the mid to high 20s, it makes sense that its 2C big brother, the Equinox EV, will start in the low to mid 30s. And the bigger battery, and so as a consequence, more expensive, but also slightly faster charging 2C Chevy Blazer EV will start in the low to mid $40,000 range. So that actually sort of breaks out nicely. So really, in order for the 1C offerings that Hyundai and Kia has in like the Kona Electric and the Niro EV, for them to really make more sense, they just need to drop that price a little bit, acknowledge that they're getting their batteries for a lower cost, that these are lighter, more economical vehicles for people who don't need as high a power DC fast charging, basically a more typical user rather than what we're seeing right now, which is the more affluent sort of EV power users who have a lot more money, have a lot more freedom of mobility and freedom of time, and so they do take a lot more trips. And according to that BTS data, those are that 25% of Americans who do regularly make, long trips of 200 or 300 miles or more each year. And those are the people who really demand that higher power, faster charging. They're going to give up a little bit in terms of having to pay more money. They're going to have to pay a premium. They're going to have a slightly heavier vehicle. They're going to have a slightly less efficient vehicle. But the benefits that they get out of that are a faster charging vehicle. But in my opinion, all around, there's still a very valuable space occupied by those 1C EVs like the Bolt EV. Yes, there are other things that GM needs to work on with the Bolt EV in particular. It's being sort of held back by a lower power CCS charging harness than it deserves to have, right? It really needs to have that 200 amp CCS charging harness so it can both realize its full 1C rated charging rate while concurrently running battery management, running cabin conditioning, all of those things without impacting, right? Making sure that its effective charging rate really is a true 1C charging rate, similar to what we see in something like the Hyundai Kona Electric or the Kia Niro EV. So there is some work to do there. And then, of course, the other aspect that fits into this is one of the more economical battery chemistries is LFP, the lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry. It's cobalt-free, so all of you pearl clutchers who are on your personal electronic devices but want to cry foul about artisan mining, well, guess what? Those batteries don't contain cobalt. So big, important aspect there. But at the same time, they're lower power density. So they are a 1C just by their very nature. You can get higher power LFP, but generally you're not going to. And so for automotive purposes, that means that this $20,000 to $30,000 class of electric vehicles is very likely to remain 1C for a very long time. And I think that that's perfectly acceptable, and I think that we should embrace it. And the one other aspect of it that I think I kind of glossed over is, again, 1C EVs typically are more efficient because they have a lighter battery pack, and just overall they're a more economical vehicle. So a Bolt EV charging at 50 kilowatt is not that far off of an original Tesla Model S charging at over 100 kilowatt, just because there's such a huge difference in the efficiency of the vehicles. This car doesn't need to charge as fast. We saw the same thing with the Lightyear 1 concept, which, as proposed, was a 1C charging rate car. But what it turns out, when you have 400 to 500 miles of range and you're getting 5, 6, 7 miles per kilowatt hour, charging at 50 kilowatt isn't really that big of a deal. Charging at 60 kilowatt still means that a meal break will let you drive for another 4 to 5 to 6 hours. So yeah, it's all sort of relative, and it's something that we need to keep in mind, that there's costs and benefits to each and every one of these aspects. But like I said, the sort of overarching theme is just because you can do a thing doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do that thing. And in the case of 3C charging EVs, while they are a nice option, and I think every automaker should at least have some 3C battery charging EV options, they're not actually necessary. And for a majority of drivers, a 1C to 2C battery option, as long as the EV has sufficient range, is going to be more than good enough for them. So I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think I'm way off base? Do you think every EV that's sold this moving forward has 125, 135, 150, 200 kilowatt charging? I hear that quite a lot, actually, at this point, that people are saying that no EV should be sold unless it has triple-digit charging speeds. Or do you agree with me? Do you think that it's actually fine to have lower cost options that don't necessarily charge as fast, as long as they have sufficient range, features, functionality, efficiency, so on? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and thank you for watching.